Thanks, Veronica. Good morning, everyone. My name is Josh Patton. I'm the Lender Relations Specialist in the Lower Rio Grande Valley District. So I primarily work on the back end with banks. So I'll talk to you about the PPP today. Right, next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk about some key dates, what's going on with the program. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the first draw PPP loan, the second draw. There's been some updates to forgiveness I'm going to talk about, and then I'll kind of give you some direction if you're interested in the PPP. Next slide. Okay, so where are we now? Basically, the program has been rolled out in its entirety. So all the lenders are up and running at this point. As far as the SBA is concerned, there are still some lenders that have either chosen not to participate, or maybe they're still getting their internal processes in place. So if your lender is one of those, and you're running into issues, you can reach out to our office and we can help you navigate that. Next slide, please. And so here's the dates. So part of the mission that Congress wanted us to satisfy was we wanted to make sure that businesses who were in underserved areas or underprivileged areas got first bite at the apple. So that's what these dates are for. All of them have passed now, so the program's up and running. Like I said, the one date you want to pay attention to here is March 31st. So March 31st of this year, so 2021, all PPP applications must have been submitted. All right, so let me give you some caveats. That's the last day that we have to execute lending authority underneath this law. And so if you walk into a bank on March 31st, there's a chance that you wouldn't be able to get the loan because the bank has to process the loan. They have to review your documentation. They have to submit it to the SBA. So assuming the funds were to even hold out to March 31st, which is another issue, we did have businesses in the first round who waited to the last day and we were not able to get them funded because they didn't have enough documentation. So I would not wait on this program. I would go as quickly as possible. And again, I mentioned the funds running out. If once the money's gone, it's gone, even if it runs out before March 31st. So that's something else to keep in mind. Next slide. Okay, so for those of us, that maybe we didn't get a first draw PPP, so that's the one that we rolled out back in 2020. Congress opened up businesses that missed out on the first one for whatever reason, that you can actually use that same authority to draw this time. So if you're eligible and you didn't receive a loan prior to August 9th of 2020 under PPP first draw, you are now eligible again. And they've added some additional entity types. We're going to go over that a little bit later. They've expanded the eligible expenses. I'll talk about that briefly. So the new expenses are going to include covered operations expenditures, covered property damage, covered supplier costs, and covered worker protection expenditures. So, what does that mean? There's some verbiage that underlies each one of those criteria, each one of those areas. And so one of the caveats that I kind of conveyed to borrowers is this program is really designed for payroll. So sometimes I'll talk to a borrower and they're trying to get really creative about itemizing their expenses and stuff. If you have a question about what's covered and what's not covered, please talk to your lender, okay? We don't want to have you setting up a plan to spend this money and you're doing it with bad guidance or you're doing it, kind of on the fly. We want to make sure that as you're planning to expend these funds that you're prepared. So talk to your lender. Also, if you have any questions about it, I can answer some kind of general questions. I'm really not allowed to operate in an advisor capacity, but I can help you with that to some degree. Also, borrowers can now select a covered period to use PPP loan proceeds anytime between 8 weeks and 24 weeks. So in round one, the covered period was allowed to be 8 weeks or 24 weeks. And so the covered period is that time in which you're able to spend your money on eligible expenses and get it forgiven. Now, the covered period can be anywhere between 8 and 24. So it can be 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 10 weeks, 11 weeks. And that's just to give businesses the flexibility to, so that rather than having to document, 6 months of expenses, now you only have to document 10 weeks if that's appropriate. Additionally, certain borrowers can request an increase to their original PPP loan amount. This is mostly going to be for farmers, ranchers, and seasonal businesses. So if you have a question about that, you can reach out to your lender. They can elaborate for you. And then also that same deadline applies March 31st or until congressional appropriations expire. Next slide, please. All right, so what entities are eligible? So the businesses that are still eligible, it's going to be regular structures, partnerships, corporations, LLCs, sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed. One of the ones that I think a lot of people missed out on in the first round was, your sole props and your independent contractors. Sometimes we don't consider ourselves a business, but we are, right? We're just a one-man shop. So if you are an independent contractor, definitely get in touch with your bank, because the money that you are compensated with can be considered payroll. Okay. Also, 501c3 nonprofits, 501c19 veterans organizations, and tribal businesses. And the Economic Aid Act added a couple different entities that are now covered. Housing cooperatives, destination marketing organizations, certain 501c6s, such as chambers of commerce. That was a big one that missed out on funding in the first round. And then eligible news organizations. Okay. So if you're any of those entities, you're good. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the second draw. So in order to be eligible for the second draw, you have to have previously received the first draw. You have to have 300 employees or less, and you have to have suffered a 25% or greater reduction in gross receipts. Okay. For most borrowers, the maximum loan amount on the second draw is going to be 2.5 times your average monthly payroll for 2019 or 2020, up to a maximum of $2 million. So it's going to look it's going to look very similar to the value that you received in round one. Borrowers who are in the accommodation and food services sector. So if you have a NAICS code that begins with a 72, you can get that on your tax return typically. And then if not, you can go to NAICS.com and you can look up your industry to see if you are under a 7.2. That maximum loan amount is expanded to 3.5 times your average monthly payroll for 2019 or 2020, up to $2 million. The application for the second draw is a little bit different than the first draw. So if you are going to your lender, make sure that you're filling out the 2483 SD. The application for the first draw is just regular 2483. Okay. The one thing I will say about this, if you are wanting to apply, reach out to your lender first and see how they're collecting information. A lot of lenders have a third-party portal where you enter the information and then it ports it into the application for you. So you wouldn't want to do the double work. But if you are having a hard time getting a hold of your lender, it might be intelligent to go ahead and download the application, start putting your package together. So as soon as your lender reaches out to you, you've got everything ready. All right, next slide, please. Second draw PPP loan eligibility. Touched on this a little bit, but again, you must have previously received a first draw PPP loan. And then there's some additional criteria. So you have used or will have used the first draw PPP loan only for eligible expenses before the second draw can be dispersed. Okay, so what does that mean? If I'm a business and I haven't gotten a first draw yet, I can go to the bank and I can get approved for the first draw and the second draw, assuming I'm eligible, simultaneously. But what I can't do is I can't have the money. I can't have that whole chunk of money for both programs at the same time. The bank can approve me and they can disperse round one, and then I would go spend it, and then I would go back and they would disperse round two. And what the advantage of that to the business is that if funding runs out, you've got money now that is allocated to you. Once you've been approved, that money is set aside for you, even if the funding runs out. So if you are talking to your bank and you're going to get a first and a second, Make sure that you're asking them about, getting approved for one and getting dispersed, and then at the same time getting approved for two. Okay. You can have no more than 300 employees. Now there is some verbiage for 7.2 NAICS codes businesses, particularly like hotels and stuff, where if they have more than 300 employees per location, that's the way it's looked at, rather than 300 employees total for the business. So if you are the other one is a news organization. If you're a qualifying news organization or a 7.2 NAICS code business, and you've got more than 300 employees across the network of your entity, definitely take a look at that. Talk to your lender about your employee count eligibility treatment. Also, businesses, you have to demonstrate at least a 25% reduction in gross receipts between comparable quarters in 2019 and 2020. So comparable quarter, so I'm comparing Q1 of 2020 to Q1 of 2019, or Q3 of 2020 to Q3 of 2019. And I have to have a 25% reduction or more. Okay. If you run into a situation where, you've been in operation for all of 2019 and all of 2020, and you can't find a comparable quarter where there is a 25% reduction, you can compare the full year. So you would compare all of 2019 to all of 2020. And if you can get a reduction that way, you could also qualify. But most people are going to have to do it like this. Next slide. All right, so forgiveness updates. The borrowers have to apply for forgiveness through their lender. I get calls every day where the bank is saying, hey, yeah, you need to call the SBA. That's not true. You always for forgiveness and for origination have to work through the lender. The lenders are submitting your borrower forgiveness decisions to the SBA. So how this process works, you go to the bank, you give them your documentation, the bank reviews it, makes a decision, submits that decision to the SBA. The SBA reviews it, agrees or disagrees, and then either disperses funds or issues a forgiveness decision and disperses the funds to pay off your loan. So it always goes through the lender. So the updates: idle advances are no longer deducted from the forgiveness payment. All right. So back in the beginning of forgiveness, we were outstanding balances were being left if you had an idle advance. That's no longer a thing. The forgiven PPP loans are not taxable income. Expenses paid with PPP loan funds are now tax deductible. And if you want any more detailed information than that, you'd want to talk to the IRS or talk to your lender. And they'll probably have to help you get in touch with the IRS. Okay. Expanded forgivable expenses are permissible for any PPP loan not already forgiven. So those items that I mentioned in the beginning, if you haven't gotten your loan forgiven yet, you're now eligible to claim those expenses to justify forgiveness. Keep in mind though, the 60-40 split still applies. So at least 60% of the money needs to go to payroll and 40% can go to other covered expenses. And then the simplified forgiveness application for loans under $150,000 has been released. It's the 3508S. So next slide. All right, so what to do now? Contact your lender. If you don't have a lender, SBA maintains a database where we try to help borrowers and lenders match with each other. It's called Lender Match. You can go to sba.gov/lender match. And you just follow the instructions on there and they'll help match you with a lender. You can also reach out to our office. I do stay in touch with banks. I kind of, test the waters to see who's taking applications from non-customers. A lot of banks are not, but I do have some in the area that can help you if your lender is not doing PPP loans and you're struggling with lender match. We've also got some additional resources. Again, you can reach out to our office with general questions or if you need help with something. And then we do have an SBA newsletter that you can sign up for at sba.gov/updates. And you can follow us on Twitter. I know we stay pretty active on Twitter.